almost 10 years now, I have been out of that loop. But I guess I'll recount a bit the history of the things that I did in this previous life.
Mhm.
So my first big passion was natural science,
Mhm.
chemistry and physics especially. And I had the incredible luck to have had a good a good approach to the local university,
Mhm.
who allowed me to take classes there, sometimes just listening in and sometimes actually participating.
Mhm.
And eventually this passion sort of shifted a little bit towards the more abstract side. So I went into pure mathematics.
Mhm.
I studied at Imperial College in London in their pure mathematics program, which was really a incredibly inspiring thing, because these were people who lived so far inside their own world of abstract mathematics that they couldn't figure out if 27 was a prime number. I mean, literally, I heard this conversation in one of the hallways, and it started that, well, let's take any prime number. And the other guy said, 27. Wait a minute, is 27 prime? I have no idea. And they were so obsessed with this kind of abstraction and thought, and uh, basically a kind of, you could say, philosophical logic that this
Mhm.
kind of mathematics is about. That these reality related things just were not important anymore. And then I guess for some personal reasons, I had to leave London, and I went to Paris and I pursued my education there. I got a master's from the University of Pierre et Marie Curie,
Mhm.
which at the time was called that. Now it's called Sorbonne.
Mhm.
And that was 2012, I think. And
Wow.
then after that, I sort of became lazy and just
No, you're never
decided to
lazy.
pursue. Well, but wouldn't you agree with me that music, at least, is something that is in a way very good for slightly lazy people, because it gives you instant gratification. Whether if you're doing something that's not music, if that's not a performing art,
Mhm.
you cannot just do something that you already know and feel a great sense of accomplishment. In music, you can. You play a piece you know, you play it, you listen to something you like, and it
Mhm.
makes you feel good immediately, even if you've already done that.
Wow, this is your sense of laziness. Then I guess perhaps you're right. I so talking about um, science, I was wondering because nowadays the world sort of always divide things easily: science versus art, reason versus let's say creativity or sentiment. So for you who actually embody both elements, the scientific training you had, also like your artistic way of perceiving the world, these two elements, um, to me, they're actually, not so different from each other. But I guess for many other people outside of the art world, they somehow cannot really see that. Can you please maybe enlighten people a little bit?
Well, I think there is, of course, science in art, but the way that people perceive art does not generally take that into account. I would say that, for example, in music, let's talk about that because it's what we know really
Mhm,
intimately.
mhm,
When you hear composition, what you hear are emotions. It's also what you're trained to hear.
mhm,
Music appreciation class is about trying to put into poetic or fake poetic language what a piece of music is sort of trying to say.
mhm,
And we focus so much in music on that kind of perception
mhm,
that we actually don't realize that a composer is maybe thinking 80% of the time about something else. Of course, he is thinking about the kind of literal allusions or the kind of images that he wants to put into his music, but that takes 5 seconds. The rest of the time of actually composing is a much more scientific process, I would say.
You know this better than many other, musicians, because you yourself is a great composer. So can you perhaps share some of your process of creating music, on top of the fact that you just mentioned about this very scientific way of looking at music?
I guess I could say that there is a sort of an analogy between composing and mathematics, and as well as between performing in terms of interpreting and natural science. Because in performing in classical music, we have that which is the composition at the base, which you don't change, basically. And that's like the reality we're trying to describe.
Yes.
And natural science is trying to make reality comprehensible to human language, to the human mind. It's about seeing what exists in the world and explaining it in a way that we can understand and that we can make use of. Just like performing a piece of music is about explaining that piece of score in a way that we can orally enjoy it and understand it. And composing is like mathematics because it's about finding something interesting. It's about creating a world which may or may not exist, which has some kind of interesting property. And well, I mean, there's a joke about mathematicians. It says there's a very long paper, and the first page is all definitions. And on the second page, it says, in this paper, we will now look at what happens in the world of functions that satisfy all these criteria. And then it goes on and on to say, if it satisfies all these criteria, then it actually does something really interesting, and you can apply it to this, that, and the other. And then the last sentence with a star, the asterisk, and at the very bottom it says, it is absolutely obvious that there are no functions that satisfy these criteria. So what I mean is mathematics is about creating something and just following your thoughts to see if it leads to something interesting. And that's like composing. Of course, you can compose anything you want, but the point of composing something is to create a kind of inner logic within a piece, which you are, and of which you're writing all of the notes. You want to create this logic that makes something interesting.
Wow, this is fascinating.
That I realized that music is art. What I mean by art in this sense, I mean in a very narrow sense, is that it expresses what it means to be human and not just tries to entertain the average human. So I guess this must have come in some part through the people I have had the chance of working with, of observing, and of getting to know. First and foremost among them, Alfred Brendel, who is, of course, somebody who absolutely comes from the world of art. You might, I guess many people think of him as a kind of hermetic musician, but he is absolutely not. He is, I think, the very definition of what you called Renaissance man in terms of being deeply affected, knowledgeable, and opinionated about every kind of art. So nowadays, I must say that one of my greatest pleasures is looking at art, especially looking at classic painting in museums. And that has, of course, absolutely changed the way that I look at music, because I see that music is born firstly of the same culture. The music that we are dealing with in our professional lives is basically European music between 1500 and 1900. That is the core of what we do. And it's also the core of this great tradition of painting. Be that as it may, I think one of the great similarities is that at the base, there is a core of what you could even call a little bit scientific, which is about aesthetics. It's about what the human mind is pre-programmed either by nature or by culture to find beautiful and attractive. And I think one of the things that it finds attractive is structure. This sounds terribly mathematical and unartistic, but it's not, because it is really what makes art worthwhile and enjoyable.
For sure.
It's that it gives us something that we can latch onto, meaning that we can understand in such a way that we can make predictions. We can see patterns, and these patterns suggest ways of continuing themselves to the person who's listening or the person who's watching, who's looking. When these patterns are then modified in certain ways, then we get a kind of satisfaction, or we get a kind of suspense, which makes us want to keep looking. It's in a way just a very human thing
Right.
that is both in visual art and in audio art.
And it's also storytelling.
Hmm?
I think I often see art as like sort of a maybe condensed way, or sometimes it can be shortened way for people to perceive life itself, because it's like dream. When we are dreaming, we don't really see the time and space becomes very different. I see art is sort of like similar to that aspect of human imagination. So we all have a sense of existence, like how we function in life, how we perceive ourselves or others or the world. And that emotional aspect somehow sometimes can be neglected in daily life. But through art, we somehow can sort of maybe recapture that element. And it's the same
Yes,
thing
I think
with
one of the things that really art is great at doing, and music as well, is encapsulating a lot from our emotional experience into one thing, whether it be a thing that you see or a thing that you hear. And I would say that when we neglect these things in daily life, and I absolutely do, and I don't think I have ever felt the way that the Sixth Symphony of Tchaikovsky feels, but I guess I can sort of understand what that is, and it does enrich my emotional experience, even if I'm not sure I ever want to feel like that myself. That's one level. I guess the other thing which gives my life meaning is to be able to imagine, is to put myself into another world, to create my own reality in a way that I can inhabit it in whichever time frame and in whichever state of mind that I wish. I guess this is absolutely what one could call a luxury problem. I don't think I don't think everybody in the world thinks that this is important, but I have
no,
had the good
fundamentally
fortune.
important. I think it is fun. Yeah, you use the word to imagine, but I think we all have to have that. I think it's perhaps more to do with psychology, because when we talk about imagination, somehow we associate with maybe art or things are not real. But the thing is, we are all very subjective, and each individual, we see the world completely in a different way. And I believe that I mean, maybe I'm not a psychologist, but I do find it's fascinating that in different, sort of methods, I think they often sort of get layers of different consciousness, right? So whether it's like maybe it's a little bit outdated, but people like Carl Jung, for example, always talk about, collective consciousness versus like subconsciousness. I mean, I mean, maybe it's more of a philosophical approach rather than a psychological approach. But I do find that it's very important for all of us to have that very individual approach of how to perceive the world, or perceive us, most importantly, because we don't really know who we are. I mean, I'm actually interviewing you, but I think perhaps like both of us, we're trying to figure out what we really want to say, or what we really feel, or how
that's what
really
happens when you interview people. That's what happens when you interview people you know.
Yeah. So I think, I totally agree with you. I think it is very, very crucial for us to discover and maybe a different world. That's not to say that imagination or anything it's abstract is not real. It's actually really real. Because how can we say that the things that we see every day is the truth? I mean, it's even for scientists, you cannot really prove that everything we perceive is truth, right? You have to prove.
Yes, I think what you're getting at is also that our currency, when we're talking to each other, when we're thinking about the world, we're not actually talking about the world. We're not actually talking about. We're not actually, sharing the world with each other. What we are is sharing a mental construct of it.
Exactly.
And this mental construct is something that I suppose you could say is a concept in and of itself. And what we are saying is that this concept is a very valuable thing. And it's not just a kind of proxy for reality, but actually what we should be really investigating and where we're really living is inside this collective concept.
Wow, thank you for translating for me. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. But as you can tell, I'm pretty horrible with language. That's exactly what I was trying to say. And
a whole sequence of examples in the history of art of people who somehow bypassed this whole area of thought and just somehow intuitively tapped into something which, in the eyes of everyone else, managed to encompass the whole of humankind. I mean, I guess the headline quote is this famous quote from Terence, right? I am human, therefore nothing that is human can be foreign to me. The point being that it is sufficient just to be human. One doesn't have to consciously investigate all these things. Just by existing, one is already experiencing all that. Well, I mean, of course, you don't agree, I don't agree, as far as I can tell. But it happened, right? And I think the painter Hokusai, the Japanese painter, as far as I know, he was not really an intellectually curious scholar. He was simply interested in painting, and painting was an obsession. And when you look at his works through the painting, you see a whole intelligence, and you see a whole library of historical allusions and all these things which seem to be conscious but actually are subconscious. And I'm sure it happened in music too. And we've been in rehearsals where I hear somebody playing something incredibly beautifully, and maybe there will be some detail that I think is just absolutely inspired. And I would just think to myself, how did he know to play that note softly? How did he know that in that moment that was the right thing to do? And I would think, yes, I mean, you can think of all these different examples in the history of art. Also, if you look at color shading in this particular painting that I saw in this museum, you see that they use exactly the same kind of concept. And if you think of this, I don't know, this passage in Shakespeare, you will see that he actually had the exact same aesthetic idea. And this is just something so universal. And you realize, knowing that man, I'm sure he has absolutely no idea why he did that.
When I hear a really remarkable sort of performance, what strikes me most is not how people execute things, right? I mean, I'm not even talking about the technical part, but even, like the so-called how people phrase things, how they use different colors. I don't really think these things really personally strike me. Sometimes when I completely forget the fact that I'm actually listening to music, I'm actually if I feel like I'm in a different space and time, I forget about music. I forget about interpretation. I forget about even this is art. Then I that's something that truly touches me. So maybe that's why I often find it more inspiring to get to hear maybe musicians like you who actually have lots of different perspective, because that actually shows in your playing, I have to say.
This is a really interesting experience that you share about listening to music and forgetting that it's music that you're listening to. And if I understand a bit between the lines, what you mean is that instead of hearing music, what you're hearing is the universal thoughts of that person, and also of a human in general, of what it means to think and how thoughts work and follow each other, and how they represent what we see and what we feel. Now, I must say that in music, I'm not sure I have this idea or this impression so often when I listen to other people. It's just because I'm a terrible listener in music, unless I'm playing. I think I'm a decent accompanist. Correct me if I'm completely wrong, but I think I can accompany people quite well. But when I'm not playing, then it's just impossible for me to listen to music. So I get my aesthetic pleasure through painting first and foremost, and exactly this kind of feeling I had with this painting. You know the artist, probably 17th century, 18th century, Zheng Banqiao.
Oh yes.
There's a work of his in New York, in the Metropolitan Museum. It's huge, and it's like, I guess, 1.5 meters or something like that. Let me show it to you. Do you see it?
Oh wow. Yes, wow. It's beautiful. With lots of shades. Yes.
So when I was looking at this, I realized that, just subconsciously, I didn't even know anymore that I was looking at bamboo. What I was looking at was how do I say, a realization, or what I was looking at was the making into reality of what aesthetics is about. I mean, the idea of why is there a bamboo in this shade of that shape in this particular point? And it's like this painting made me ask that question. Why is it that as a human separated by many thousands of kilometers and many hundreds of years, I absolutely feel exactly the same thing that the creator of this work of art felt, that it is absolutely right to have that thing right here. I'm sure it's not because he walked out and sort of looked up and say, ah, yes, there is a bamboo. I'm going to draw it right there. There is another one. I'm going to draw it. I think this is something that is a product of his mind, this picture. And the fact that this is something that the human imagination creates based on rules which apparently are absolutely universal. That to me was the most moving thing about this picture.
Wow, this is beautiful. Um, yeah, and you also, I mean, it's remarkable that you you know, have curiosity about you know, ancient Chinese culture, because this is not something it's very common among, you know, not only just classically trained musicians, but also for someone who was, you know, you were raised in, you know, the Western culture, right? So this is actually very remarkable that you have that uh, thirst for knowledge. Yeah, yeah. How did you even first encounter, you know, Chinese painting? I have to say I'm pretty ignorant with my own culture, so.
Oh. Well, there's always time. I mean, yes, I guess when we met for the first time, it was not something that I often thought about. And of course, it was sort of always in the background because I know who I am, I know where I come from, and I know what many people who have been very important to me and for whom I have a great affection and a real interpersonal bond, what they have been very moved by and what they have thought were the greatest things in the world. And I guess one day I discovered for myself that in some way, I also think it's the greatest thing in the world.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm a little bit speechless because you know it's very rare for me to actually meet people in general who have just, you know, such deep understanding of you know, humanity in some way. And you're really young, but you already, you know, have such profound sort of understanding for everything. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, I mean, thank you. This is
Really,
it's wonderful to catch up again, and you know, thank you so much for doing this. It's really very enriching and stimulating, and
oh, thank you.
I just wish I had a silver bullet to make everybody in the world see, you know, what you're doing here. And unfortunately, marketing is one of the things I least understand. So
Me neither. But for me, it's you know, I don't think about reaching out to, you know, many people. This is not my goal because it's like concerts. I don't think we have to try really hard to convince everyone to appreciate, you know, music. But if we can,
absolutely,
yeah, if we can just perhaps touch one person in the audience and then change that person's some, you know, perspective, that's, I think it's already really meaningful. And obviously I think, you know, for me and talking to you, it's really like what I said. Obviously I really admire your artistry or your musicianship, but more importantly, it's that you have that thirst for knowledge, for, you know, different aspect in life. That really inspired me. And thank you so much for that. And also, you know, it's really just maybe 1 hour or so, but we really get to hear someone who just is really extraordinary. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it's great talking to you.
Yeah,
And
and take care, and hopefully, you know, you know, have lots of time to cook. You know, maybe now it's time because you don't travel anymore. And we'll keep maybe watching all your performances.
yes, and there's one every day. I think I will start putting some more fancy things into them. Some of this is still a bit secret, but there will be some, yes, fancy stuff coming in. I think today there was a cat picture, you know, this lol cat picture. So there will definitely be more of that.
Well, thank you. I can't wait to, you know, to watch more of those videos, especially like your you know, the way how you describe music. It's so poetic and it's so right to the point. It's very refreshing and educational as well. So yeah, thank you so much and take care.
Well, you too.
Yeah,
Many greetings to
hopefully one
Philadelphia,
day,
and
yeah, we get to see each other in Europe somewhere.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we will of course keep in touch, and let me know whenever your next great idea comes along. It's
Thank you.
probably in 5 minutes, but yes, keep me informed.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.
All the best. Bye bye.
Bye.